Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hi, everybody. This is Brian Smith. I'm back with another episode of Grief to Growth, and today I've got with me Rebecca Valla. And Rebecca is a psychiatrist in private practice in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She's been a lifelong spiritual seeker, which led her to her interest in near-death experiences, and that's what we're going to probably talk about primarily today. Near-death experiences, reincarnation, and expanded consciousness. She's focused in her work with patients on inner child healing and on self-love. Much of her work is informed by her own childhood pain and her learning through psychotherapy and personal growth. Spirituality is the core of self-growth work that she journeys on with her patients. And you can hear Rebecca's story and see how she approaches her work through her YouTube channel at IANS Conference 2016 videos, Rebecca Valla MD, and that's Valla, Valla. And Rebecca, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. So her website is RebeccaSVallaMD.com. I'll put that in the show notes so I don't have to go through spelling it out. But with that, I want to welcome you, Rebecca, to Grief to Growth.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about what got you started in the work that you're doing. It's really fascinating to hear a psychiatrist that works in expanded consciousness field. So how did you get started on that?
Well, my own growth is really what led to my approach now. We all have a story, and my story is I'm from a large family, 7 children, and a lot of violence in my family, a lot of emotional, physical abuse, and I was one of the last ones. I was 6 out of 7,
Okay.
and so there was just a lot of opportunity in my childhood to ask questions about what was my reason for being, and to feel that if I wasn't really welcomed by my family, then what was a greater purpose for my being here. And I started my spiritual quest very young. And they say, I now know, after living all these years and doing my training and working with so many different people, that it's through pain and suffering that we have so much opportunity to learn. And I now believe that I agreed to come into that family. I agreed to have this opportunity to learn on my own without really having models to follow. And so that means that I had an opportunity to be kind of free in terms of what worked for me and following my own path.
Yeah.
So led me to where I am.
So you went through this pain in your childhood, and is that what led you to go into psychiatry?
Probably, yeah. Trying to understand my story, my parents' story, my father's story. He was the primary person who was creating so much, pain and violence in the family. But there was also an interest in spirituality from a very young age, and an experience that, for me, and I was born in a Christian family. For me, I started reaching out to prayer and to feeling the presence of in my experience, it was Jesus as a loving father figure, I guess, in a way. And it was very real to me, very powerful.
So you said you were a Christian, you started praying and reaching out to Jesus, and you felt the presence.
I felt Jesus's presence, and there would be little messages from, I started going to Bible school on my own when I was about 8. And that was in a gospel church. And so, gospel churches are known for trying to bring people to accept Christ as their savior and open
Right.
their heart.
Right.
And, there was a lot of this idea of, Jesus is waiting for you to accept him into your heart. And I felt like, well, I did that a long time ago. Nobody
Yeah.
had to tell me that.
Yeah.
I felt like I had already been guided and led before I really heard anybody speaking about it. And that was kind of affirming because, it's kind of like, well, if all these people think this is real important and I've already discovered how important it is, then, there must be more here for me. And I kept going. I ended up as a teenager, discovering Quakerism
Oh, really? Okay.
and the Quaker philosophy that there is that of God in every person,
Mm-hmm.
and which means that we're all connected and we're all spiritual and we're all one.
So how did you discover Quakerism? Was that on your own also?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
actually through one of my siblings had started to go.
Mm-hmm.
We had my family had been in a Brethren sect when I was a child.
Okay.
It was called Plymouth Brethren, and it was more of a cult than anything. And there was a lot of emphasis on not being part of the world being seen as corrupt. And the idea was the Bible verse about being in the world, but not of the world. And so there was a lot of, separating out. We couldn't socialize with other children. We couldn't celebrate Christmas the way that people did. We had, a lot of restrictions, couldn't watch television, couldn't have movies, couldn't read newspapers.
Wow.
We did go to school with, all the other children in the community where I grew up. But anyway, I didn't get a lot out of the Brethren experience, but maybe it was instructive in some way, in a sort of a negative direction. That's not what my belief is about who God is, and that's not where I would find the comfort, and the connection with spirituality was not going to be there.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think we have, as you said, we kind of come into these things, and it's like we learn what our path is not going to be.
Yeah.
In
Right.
those early experiences.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
So you decided to study psychiatry, which is maybe it's a stereotype, but kind of known for being materialistic or atheistic. There's not a lot of spirituality that most psychiatrists use in their work. So how do you find that fits with your spirituality with your psychiatric training?
Well, there are a lot of people in the mental health field who they have loving hearts, and whether they're master's level therapy trained, or whether they're psychologists, PhD level, or whether they're psychiatrists. Now, it's true. I had discovered psychotherapy. I worked with an analyst. He was both a Freudian trained and Jungian trained analyst for 5 years before I ever went to medical school. And it was actually through him that he encouraged me to think about going to medical school. I didn't have any other encouragement. I didn't have any support about that idea. And I didn't know any doctors. There weren't any that I knew close and personally. But the analyst that I worked with, who was a psychologist, PhD, felt that for me and for what I could offer, that being a psychiatrist would give me more opportunity. And that being a doctor, at that time, doctors were largely directors of centers and things of that kind. Now, they're not usually doctors. They're usually more business-related backgrounds. But it was through him that I ended up going through all my pre-med coursework while I was working as a special ed teacher, and then going to medical school. And of course, knowing pretty much right away that I would probably end up going into psychiatry. And I just saw psychiatry as working with people who are in pain and working with people who are emotionally suffering.
Yeah.
And I knew all about that.
Yeah.
And I thought I had learned a lot about how that could be used in a helpful way. And so I felt like I would be not only able to learn and do whatever I was trained to do, but I also would know from my own personal experience how people felt. And, and be able to connect with people on a more human level, which is somehow I was led to do. I just was led to do that. And so it didn't really matter that it was the science. The science of it all is always changing. We're learning
Yes.
more about the body and the brain and the nervous system and trauma. We're learning a great deal about trauma now in
Mm-hmm.
current times, much more so than we knew when I was in training. I never saw any kind of discrepancy between going into psychiatry and doing heartfelt work and connecting with people.
Yeah, I guess my question is more like not that psychiatrists are not heartfelt or care about people. I think that's very true, but like for example, when I was going for therapy, I knew that my problems are more spiritual, I guess I would say, or more soul level
Yeah.
than the mental health, I guess. So I went to see I saw that specifically a Christian counselor.
Uh-huh.
But I think when I think of psychiatrists, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, it's very looking at the person not as not so much as a soul, but as from more of a scientific point of or medical kind of point of view. Is that
Well,
right?
that's true of all medicine.
Yeah.
You know, medicine really is kind of behind in terms of what we're a mind body. You know, we're not just a body,
Right.
and we're beings of light. We're
Yeah.
multidimensional beings of light, actually.
Yeah.
And you know, they're not the medical world is just beginning to even understand things like energy therapies and holistic work and that kind of thing. But we all need to start somewhere in terms of credentials,
Mm-hmm.
right? You
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
and even if I had become a minister, which is something that I considered when I was young,
Mm-hmm.
before I really, had a whole lot of therapy experience of my own and such, I would have been going into different directions than most ministers are trained to go in.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really great. I think it's really encouraging to talk to someone who's medically trained, who has this broader perspective, because I think it's really, really important. And she said, even when it comes to doctors that are not in the mental health field, but just regular MDs, they see that they view us as just bodies.
yeah,
We're biological robots, and they
yeah,
can't treat the whole person. And like you said, things like energy healing, they totally dismiss. They dismiss how the mind affects the body, because I think it's only the body that affects the mind. So I'm just, like I said, I'm just really encouraged to see someone who's got your training and your background, who can bring that entire person into focus.
yeah. And if I hadn't had all of my childhood experience, if I hadn't had all the need to learn what it is to find your life's purpose and your true self and to heal my inner child, I wouldn't be able to bring to bear with patients. And it's not just with patients, it's also talks like this and
Mm-hmm.
talks like I gave for the near-death studies organization
Mm-hmm.
about self-love. um, I have this knowing. I have a knowing of what's true and what's important. And I try to do that in a way when I'm working with an individual person in my office. I try to do my work very much in a attunement with where my intuition takes me, with where they're at and what they're needing. And I always feel like I have guidance, like I'm not doing my work alone. I always
Yeah.
feel like, I'm the only other person in the room, but I'm not the only other spirit in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so great. I think it's
Yeah.
awesome. I want to talk to you about healing the inner child, because I think that's a kind of a cliche that we, maybe y'all heard growing up, and people kind of poo-poo or laugh at. I can tell you again, when I was in therapy, I found it to be very important, even though I didn't know it was important. There's something I needed to do. And so I was sitting in with the therapist, and
Right.
we started going back into my past, and she's like, "You've got some work you need to do to heal little Brian."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me about what that's about.
Well, we all have inner children. We're children, and we continue to grow in physical ways and become, you know, aged chronologically. But our child selves live on within us, and
Mm-hmm.
I usually say yes. There are different ways of looking at it, and there are people who talk about the inner children and the whole number of different ages that we carry within us. But I think that if you can just get in touch with the person you were when you were 4 or 5 years old, that's the authentic child that you came in to be. And if we're in an environment that's very loving and very secure, that little person will then guide us toward who we become as adults. But so many of us lose track. We get alienated from that little person because we're not in a really safe and supportive environment. And so we end up basically sort of pushing to the side that little person and doing what is expected of us.
Yeah.
By school, by parents, by other authorities in our lives. And we go on. We go into our adult life. We are, needing to create some sort of livelihood for ourselves, and we go to college and we have careers and we get married, and it can be well into people's 40s and 50s before they start to realize, I'm not really connected. I don't know who I am. I'm not living from a place of authenticity.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah, I think that is so true. And I was about 40 when I had this kind of like breakdown, this crisis. And I said, I went to this therapist, and she's like, we've got to work on the inner child thing. And I'm almost 20 years past that now. But when I talk to people, so many people, they're like, I don't really feel like an adult. We all pretend, we run around pretending that we're adults, but we're really we're children. We're very insecure.
That's right.
And it's just, we put on these masks, right? We pretend.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we learned to do that. We had models of people who basically thought that's what we needed to do.
Yeah.
And so we learned to do that. So we have to forgive ourselves when we realize that we've been undermining, our own true self, our own authentic self. We have a lot of work to do, but we also have a lot of compassion and forgiveness to bring to ourselves. Yeah. And it's only really in giving ourselves the love and the kindness and the forgiveness that we really have it to give to other people. It enables us to be so much more of a human being, to do that kind of, inner healing work.
Yeah, I remember as we're having this, I'm thinking about my grandmother, because my grandmother I grew up with my grandmother in the house with me. And I remember looking at her one time, and she was probably in her late 70s, and saying, you're so old, or something stupid that teenagers say. And she said, I still feel like I'm 16, and that sticks with me to this day. And this happened 40 years ago, at least 40 years ago. But I remember thinking, I was kind of taken aback by that. But I think we all kind of feel that. We all still we carry those inner children with us as we become adults.
We do. There is actually a writer. He's a Jungian therapist who has done a lot of writing, and I would recommend his books. His name is David Richo, Richo. I believe he's a psychologist, and he's Jungian in his outlook, and he's also spiritual. And Jung himself was someone who we think had near-death experiences and was a spiritual person.
Yeah, you can tell from what he writes.
Tell by some of his writing.
Yeah.
And one of David's books is How to Be an Adult.
That sounds interesting.
And it's worth looking at. And he's written a number of other books.
Okay.
They're small, and they're very worth reading. They're not an easy read. You have to kind of study them and take notes when you're reading them. But they're written by a therapist who's really an integrated person in terms of his own growth and spirituality.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important for people to really understand that, because I think sometimes we think everybody else has it together and we don't. Like, I'm the only one feeling this way. I'm the only one that feels lost. I don't know what to do. I don't know who I really am. But everybody else seems to be doing okay.
That's right. And that's what we do. We compare ourselves. We should be our own best advocate. But, we don't feel that we have permission to do that. So much of us get confused about what's selfish versus what is self-love. And they're not the same at all.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next question. Let's talk about self-love and the importance of self-love.
Yeah, well, self-love is what we have to be. We have to be loving of ourselves if we're going to be loving of other people. You can't give what you don't already have. And those of us who've had parents who really fell short, we can look back after we do our healing work. we can look back and we can see, well, they couldn't give us what they didn't have. And they hadn't discovered the work they needed to do. And maybe they didn't have the opportunity to have some real help with doing that work. But self-love is what we give, we give to little children instinctively, right? We give them love, without expecting anything in return. We just want them to be happy, and we want them not to suffer. And if they need something or need us or come to us with a problem, we want to help them. Well, we need to give that to our own little person. And we need to find out how we've marginalized ourselves from our little person. We don't really know who our little person is.
Yeah.
And we've done that out of habit, and it's been going on for so long that we don't even realize. And if we weren't connected with in a way that was really loving and helpful as children, then we haven't learned how to do it in some way that makes it easy. And so in the beginning, it's going to feel very awkward. And, I don't know how to get in touch with my little person. I don't know how to talk to her or him. I don't really even know how they're feeling. But intuitively, we know they're there. Most of us know that we have an inner self and that there's pain there. And the closer we get and the more we tear, when I'm working with someone and they tell me about their childhood, and when I'm able to connect with their experience, if they tear up, I know we've touched on their child self.
Right.
And so then I ask them, okay, now what is your child feeling? This is how you connect. But you have to go into the pain in order to make a connection. And then you have to have compassion. And there is a lot online now about self-compassion that people can find and can use. There's lots of resources. That's one of the benefits of our computer age, is that we can access resources.
Yeah.
And of course, therapy is there, but that's therapy is a relationship that we form with someone who we trust, and not just go to a therapist, because it might not be the right person for us. And so we really have to use some inner guidance in order to get connected with a therapist who we really feel is the right person for us. And sometimes there's some trial and error before that actually works out okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's, we talk about self-love, that was one of the things I worked on with my therapist when I was in therapy, but, and we talked earlier about the religious background, and I always felt like, if self-love is kind of like not being humble, it's not being, you shouldn't say good things about yourself. And I find, I'm a life coach, and where I've worked with a lot of my clients, one of the biggest things is they're so hard on themselves. I mean, I find that's so common across the board. And parents that have lost children, it doesn't matter how their child passed, they always feel guilt about it. Not always. A lot of times they feel guilty about it. It could be a grown child that was across the country when it happened, but they should have somehow stopped it.
Yes.
And what I try to tell people is, talk to yourself the way you talk to, like, your best friend, or maybe how you talk to a little child. You would never say these things to another person, but we say them to ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so if anyone is motivated to look at my video, it is about self-love is not selfish. And that is one of the messages that we get from near-death experiencers when they've gone to the other side and they have had a life review and they have seen the fullness of their life and the learning that was waiting for them in their lifetime. And then when they come back, so often they have this knowledge that I have to learn about love. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And I have to love myself. I have to, no one knows better than we individually know about what we have gone through and how life has hurt us and how confused we've been. And so we're the ones we've been waiting for, right?
Yeah.
And it's an inside job.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think losing someone that we love brings us to. It brings us to our knees.
Oh, yeah.
And we're looking more directly within because we don't know where to turn.
Well, I want to make sure people understand your videos. It's on YouTube, and it was a talk you gave at the IANS 2016 conference.
Yeah, it seems to be more easy to access it through conferences. IANDS conference. So IANDS is IANDS. That's International Association for Near-Death Studies.
Mm-hmm.
Conference 2016 videos, and then put in my name, Rebecca Valla, and the talk is called "Self-Love is Not Selfish."
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, but as I said, I listen to a lot of near-death experiences, and Anita Morjani comes to mind.
Yes.
And she talks about how she was so hard on herself, and she thinks that led to her illness.
Right.
Now she talks about self-love, and I just find myself instinctively when I hear people talk about self-love, that program and my mind says, no, you can't. That's not a good thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a little kid being in Sunday school. They had this acronym they would use called JOY, which was Jesus, others, and you. So Jesus first, then other people, and then yourself last.
Right.
And that's the way we're supposed to think of ourselves. So when I think of yourself, you know, and take care of yourself first, that's a hard thing for me to hear.
But yeah, Jesus told us, that we should love others as we love ourselves.
Yeah.
We have that message. We just don't remember it.
Well, we got it
translate it. Yeah.
We got it flipped around. I think
exactly.
we took it totally backwards. We were like, okay, well, loving yourself is not a good thing, but Jesus was saying that you do love yourself, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Well, it's not only nothing wrong with it, it's absolutely what we need to do, and other things that are said, in Jesus has said, I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Mm-hmm. We're here to have abundant life. We're here to love, life and to feel joy and happiness. But we can't get there without really opening our hearts to our own pain. We have to honor our own experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about our own experiences, because you had a difficult childhood, and I think we all probably did in some ways. We come in this world and somehow we get wounded, we get bruised. Is there a purpose behind the things that we go through?
Well, I mean, that's part of my learning, that there is. Mm-hmm. It doesn't look like it on the surface, and I think we have to end up, the more we live, I think we have to get to a place where we say things are not as they seem. It's not self-evident what somebody's life is about. And the more you look at near-death experiencers and you listen to their messages, the more, it becomes clear that this is just one lifetime, and that we have lived before, and we will likely live another lifetime in the future. And that each lifetime has a trajectory that is about soul growth or learning. Mm-hmm. And the large component of that is learning about love. But there is a purpose to our lives. And if we came into a family where everything went wonderful and we were wanted and we were in good health and nobody ever died and we had all that we needed, we wouldn't really be in that same trajectory where we needed to learn. And most people don't have a life that looks like that at all.
Yeah. It's interesting because I talk to people, and as we talk about this planning or this soul planning or, these things that we go through, they want to carve out exceptions. They're like, but what was there to be learned from me being abused? What was there to be learned from someone starving to death? They'll say, I can accept this to a certain point, but they want to, or a lot of people say, I would never have chosen this family. There's mm-hmm. no way I would have chosen the family I grew up in. Yeah. So what would you say to someone that says that?
Well, things are not as they seem,
mm-hmm.
And step back and think twice about what did growing up in the family that you came from, what did it force you? What did it push you to have to confront? And what did you learn? What did you witness that was important to witness in terms of how human beings can end up becoming very distorted and being, a negative version of who they could be?
Yeah.
And what did you say to yourself? I'm never going to be a father like that father. I'm never going to be a mother like that mother. You started saying things to yourself in an early age because of what you experienced and what you witnessed. And those messages that we give ourselves as children, they begin our process for growth.
Yeah, I think that's really important. because I think my observation has been when we grow up in these families, we can either vow to never do that, or we can maybe unconsciously or just kind of sleepwalk through and become just like our parents. And I
Yeah.
see people go both ways. If you grow up with an alcoholic father, for example, you might say, well, I'm never going to drink because I don't want to be like that. Or you
Mhm.
might turn into, an alcoholic.
Mhm.
In my case, I remember my grandmother, as I said, she lived with us a big, big part of my life. She lived with us from the time I was 8 till the time I was 21 when she passed away. And she would say things like, I had a mean stepmother, so I didn't learn how to express love. And she wanted to, and she would tell us that she wanted to, but that was just not part of who she was. And she would say this to my mother and say, you can do better than I did because you've got books and television and things like that. So I grew up hearing that message. And so when I had my girls, I was like, I want to make sure that I'm a loving father, and I expressed that to them.
Right. So see how it helped you? Your grandmother was right when she said, I didn't have it. I didn't have what I needed, and so it's hard for me. And that was a loving thing for her to say,
Mm-hmm.
because she was saying, I wish I could be more loving, and I see that I was deprived, and it's I don't want to deprive you. I love you.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously she loved you because you love her and you keep referring to her.
Oh
So as
yeah.
much as she was deprived of the love she needed, she was still able to give it to you. But she could have actually, benefited from therapy and healed herself if that had been available to her.
Right. And it wasn't. And it was, I mean, I still think about it today. And I mean, it's been 35 or 37 years since she passed away, but I tear up when I think about it because, I feel sorry for her because, she wanted to express that, and that was her way of expressing it. And, so it taught me, like I said, with my girls, I wanted it to never be a question. So every
Mm-hmm.
night before they went to bed, I kissed them. I told them I loved them. I told them I was proud of them, and all the things that I didn't hear growing up. So I didn't want to turn a therapy session for me, but that was my experience.
Yes, yes. And and so you came in, sometimes, what I have to say is, once you accept reincarnation, if you see enough people who had near death experiences, you're going to come to that understanding.
Yeah.
But once you accept that, then you see this lifetime differently, and you start to say to yourself, what did I come into this lifetime already knowing that I had learned in another lifetime? And it's very interesting to ask yourself that question, because you may have already known as a child the importance of opening your heart and connecting with others. And then that you built on that
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of, basically feeling your own pain, not being afraid to feel pain. There are people who are afraid to feel pain. They just won't feel it. They'll just deny it. They'll distract themselves. They just won't feel it.
Mm-hmm.
But you came into this lifetime with an openness to feeling and having your heart open. There was a determination there. My heart is going to be open. Even though it hurts, I'm going to keep my heart open.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes a difference, why there are siblings in a same family, and some of them are able to be more loving and open in all kinds of ways, and others are not. They're more closed, and they don't trust relationships and things like that. You can see differences.
It's really interesting. And, just having two children, because I had, two children, and everybody, if you're going to have children, you should have at least two, so you can realize you're not the one that creates them, because they can be so different.
Yeah.
But there were 4 kids in my family, and I came out totally different from the other 3. And we had the same experiences, grew up in the same house with the same parents, went to the same
Mm-hmm.
church.
Mm-hmm.
And the church thing just freaked me out. I mean, it messed me up for decades. And the rest of them are just kind of like, it
Yeah.
didn't bother them at all.
Yeah. Right. So we come in, and I can tell you what I've learned looking back on my life. I can tell you that I came in to this lifetime knowing that growth and change are part of life. and that I was very accepting and open to growth and change,
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't realize, of course, growing up, that not everybody comes into this lifetime. The other thing I came into this lifetime with was truth. I really sought truth. I wanted to know what's true. I still am like that. And those two things have served me very well in terms of the path that I have, meandered down,
Mm-hmm.
and that has brought me to be guided, actually, probably primarily by my own pain and suffering, and then secondarily by the desire to help others.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds terrible when we say it. A lot of people don't like to hear it, but we do grow through pain and suffering.
Yes,
It's just a fact.
it just is.
Yeah. So, how did you get into the near-death studies? How did you find out about IANDS? What drew you to near-death experiences?
Someone suggested that I read the books of Brian Weiss.
Okay.
And Brian Weiss is a psychiatrist. And his books are about past life regression. And I would recommend them because they're fascinating to read. And they're based on his experience as a psychiatrist. And so I read all the books of Brian Weiss. And I had already been interested in Ray Moody's book, which is, Life After Life.
Mm-hmm.
And he coined the term near-death experience. And that book came out in the 70s. And because of my seeking after truth, those things were right, front and center for me to understand and learn about.
Yeah.
So after reading Brian Weiss's books, and, as a psychiatrist, I guess I could really relate to how he learned from these patients about past lives, about
Mm-hmm.
reincarnation. And then from there, near-death studies and near-death experience just, became something that I read and read and read about. And then I discovered the organization only about 8 or so years ago. And then
Okay.
I've been involved with them ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. I when I started studying about death, or what's after death, I guess, I was drawn to different things, but the near-death experience, drew me in right away, and I started reading about them. And I was telling you before we started recording, I attend our local IANDS meetings, even though I'm not an experiencer. I just like being around people here because I think the lessons from the near-death experience are universal,
Yeah.
and we can learn the lessons without going through the experience.
Yes. Luckily,
Yeah.
So there's a great deal of inspiration. So I'm often asking for my patients to look at the YouTubes that are out there
Mm-hmm.
of near-death experiencers telling their stories, and to think about going to the local groups that are available. And now we have online events that happen all the time, where we have experiencers who are teaching about what they've learned and sharing their experience. And then it takes you into other areas, because a lot of people who come back from having a near-death experience find that they have gifts that they didn't have or they didn't know they had prior to the experience. So some of them are able to be mediums. Some of them are able to connect with those whose souls are on the other side. And it just takes you into new areas. There are people who connect with their adolescent children after they pass. And it helps such a great deal with their grief. And there's writings about that. And there's a whole group of people that pursue that. And, they teach others and they help one another.
I find almost all the experiencers, well, everyone I've met, I was going to say almost, but it's actually universal. All the ones I've met, they're just like loving, giving, bright light people that just want to help, So I think it's wonderful that the message they bring back. I didn't realize there was an online.
There's
opportunity.
Part of the organization is called ISGO, ISGO.
Okay.
And that stands for groups online. I'm trying to think what the I and the S stand for, but it's meetings, it's groups online. So that, and the groups are interest focused.
Okay.
And so you can become a member of IANDS and then you can be accessing these ISGO events for very little money.
Okay.
And there are all kinds of things. After death communication is one.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who, want to focus on some aspect of healing, for example, like suicide, maybe they have had, people in their family who've suicided. And so there might be an ISGO group that's about that.
Okay. That's
all
good to know,
kinds of
because
topics.
yeah, because they're not groups in every locale. I'm fortunate. There's a meeting that's about 15 minutes for me, and they meet monthly, but not everybody has that. So for people that don't, check out the online stuff. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, look up IONS and then look up ISGO, and and get it. If you're a member of IONS, which costs very little money, you get a break on these ISGO events.
Okay, awesome.
Meetings online.
So Rebecca, how does this knowledge we know about we continue in a near-death experience, how does that relate to how we deal with grief? How can it help us getting through grief?
Okay, so grief, whether it's acute grief, like we've just lost somebody dear to us and we feel like we've been knocked over by a tsunami, or whether it's grief as an adult from someone, even a pet, someone we loved that died years ago. Once grief happens, grief will always be with us. Grief is a transformative experience. And grief is filled with hidden gifts, with the idea that there are silver linings. And grief is one of those experiences where there are always silver linings. But when it first hits us, we're not going to know what those are. Mm-hmm. And grief has to be reckoned with. You have to allow yourself to go into it, and you have to feel all of the different feelings and the pain. And grief, people who've gone through grief, they tell you that they feel pain primarily in their chest. Mm-hmm. They say that over and over again. They feel pain in their chest. And sometimes the pain comes in waves. So they might have felt like, oh, well, I'm not feeling what I felt months ago. And then all of a sudden they're having more of that pain again. And they recognize it. And they say, oh, I'm having more grief pain. And here it is. It's right in my chest. And I believe the reason it's in your chest is because that's your heart chakra. And I believe that our hearts are highly sensitive organs. We know we have subtle bodies. We're energetic beings, and our bodies don't end with our skin. Mm-hmm. There are energetic bodies that surround us, there are energy fields that surround us. And the heart chakra has such importance for our growth and our learning. And we must know that when something hits us in that way, there will be some process we need to go through, and we will be guided, and we will be brought to a place of expanded capacity for love. That is a sureness. But our heart has to open, and we have to allow that pain, and we have to know that we will be helped through it. We're not alone. We have spiritual help. And we certainly have spiritual help when we have that kind of pain. And there are a lot of hymns that talk about, it is well with my soul. Mm-hmm. That people can resonate with, that no matter what they're going through, it will be okay. And those are some of the messages near-death experiencers come back with. All is well, all will be well. And the idea is, death is part of life. Death is one of those mysteries. There can be, in the midst of the pain, there can be actual inspiration in a sense of a peace that passeth all understanding. Yeah. In the midst of great suffering, and so these are parts of the mysteries that happen with a grief experience. Grief is something that we probably have agreed to before we came into this lifetime, mm-hmm. that we would have certain losses, and that we would learn from those losses, and that we will be reunited with love. Never dies. We are reunited with those we love when we transition. Yeah, we can be guaranteed that will happen.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who actually feel connected, and they feel like they can connect and have, communication on a telepathic basis with people who passed. There are those who do that. But that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to go in that direction. Not everybody feels led.
Hmm.
But the healing work is a work of a lifetime. And there's always, in a way, it's sort of the gift that keeps on giving, because there's more and more layers of depth and learning once a person has been hit in that way.
Yeah, as you were giving your answer, you touched upon the hymn, "It is well with my soul," and just hearing that when you said that, my body just filled with goosebumps, because that song just touches me so deeply. Since my daughter passed, I mean, frankly, before that, I liked the song, but since she passed, it's just every time I hear it, it brings me to tears. But what I didn't pay attention to when I first heard that song, because I'm like, "It's well with my soul," and all this bad things happen, was the third verse. I think it's the third verse, where it says, "Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be made sight," because that's what gets me through. Is that you said, we will see them again.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference, I think, in maybe your practice versus some other people when you go to deal with grief, because, and I think it's coming around. Where it used to be, they would say, it's just like, accept the fact that the person is gone and move on with the rest of your life. Whereas now it's the continuing relationship with the person and the hope of seeing them again.
Yes. And I mean, if you want to know proof that our souls live on, you know, lose somebody dear to you, and there will be some sign, there will be some way that we will feel a connection with them, and we will have the evidence we need, because each of us has to have our own knowing that our souls live on. It's
Mhm.
not just a wish. It's not just a, let's hope. It's, it really is. It is true. And we will live on when we pass, and we will have, an experience beyond this lifetime. And whatever we learn in this lifetime will pay forward. That's what I believe. Once we
Mhm.
learn it, we don't have to relearn it. We may learn other things in our next lifetime, and we will have some choices about where our soul learning goes
Yeah.
in another lifetime.
Yeah, I know so many parents, being part of helping parents heal, that we'll talk about reincarnation, and you bring it up and they're like, "Oh, I'm never doing this again." But hopefully we don't have to learn the same lessons over again. So I like to hear you
Yeah,
say that.
yeah. Well, once we have them, we have them.
Yeah.
And we can move on. There's so many inspirational books now, and messages that come through. And there are people who just don't, churches just don't do it for them. They, and when you ask them if they pray, they're like, "No, I don't. And I don't really think I want to. And that's not, that doesn't speak to me."
Hmm.
Um, that's okay. That's okay. You will find your way.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the way someone else finds their way.
Yeah. I think churches work for a lot of people. They work for some people for their entire lives. Some of us, once something like this happens, like my daughter passing, you realize, I need to go deeper. I need something different from this. And then we move on to something else. And there are many different paths that we can take to get to the same place.
Right. And what I say to people is, if you have a spiritual practice, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation, whether it's walking with nature, being with nature, or whether it's some other more Native American kind of a way, once you have a spiritual practice, you can build on that practice,
Hmm.
and you can add into it whatever you need. And so when you start to discover that there's healing work to do, there's inner child healing work to do, then you can add it to your spiritual practice and ask. The Bible tells us, "Ask and it is given. Seek and ye shall find.
Yeah.
Knock and the door will be open." But you have to ask. I need help. I need guidance. I need comfort. I need to be shown. And you ask in the most sincere way that you know how, and you will be given an answer. It
Yeah.
may not be the answer you want, and it may not happen immediately.
Yeah, I love what you just said, and it was reminding me again my background growing up, and I remember them saying that your faith or religion or is not a cafeteria. You can't pick and choose. You have to just go with what we tell you. So here's the book, and here's the way things go, and it's exactly the opposite. We have to create our own spirituality. We have to create our own path, and we
Mhm.
can pick and choose. And the truth is everywhere around us in many traditions. I was interviewing someone earlier today about a teaching called A Course in Miracles,
Yes,
and we were talking about how that dovetails with the near-death experience and how it tells us the exact same thing that the near-death experiences are telling us.
right. Yes, I mean, Course in Miracles is a wonderful, Course in Miracles, from my understanding, is something that they say is channeled. In
Hmm.
other words, it came from spirit through the individuals that put it on paper and formulated into book form. And to me, it is very much like the near-death experiences where people have messages from their spiritual guides and from those they meet on the other side. And those messages are very meaningful and they bring them back. And Course in Miracles is like that. It's filled with that kind of very meaningful, very life-affirming, hopeful, comforting message.
Yeah, I always encourage people to, as you said, ask and it will be open to you. Seek and you shall find. Knock and check different sources and see what resonates with you. And
That's right.
your spirit recognizes truth. I think it's like we're not relearning, but we're being reminded of something we already know.
That's
And
right.
so when you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, I knew that. I remember that.
Uh-huh. We resonate, right?
Yes.
And it's at a heart level. We
Yes.
resonate with what speaks to us and what we kind of already know.
Well, let's talk about one of the questions I'd asked you for some questions before we started. And one of the ones you had said I could ask you was, what is our purpose for being alive besides learning to love better? And is this life all just work? I mean, are we here just to work, or why are we here?
Well, the purpose is joy. The purpose is joy and happiness. That's it. And learning is a joy if we go about it with our whole heart. Um, but joy and happiness are things that we actually have to kind of put some muscle into.
Mm.
They don't just happen. They do for children. Children, children are closer to the other side. They're part spirit, and they're closer to the spirit world. And so when we see little children who just authentically are who they are, and they love life, and they run around, and they're delighted with all the things that are waiting for them to learn and do, and they think their body is so wonderful because they keep learning to do different things with their bodies, and
Hmm.
um, that's the natural joy. And we see that in animals, right? We see that in dogs and puppies and kittens. Um, but when we grow to be adults, especially if we've lost connection with our child self, then joy seems sort of mysterious and hard to, we can talk about it maybe, but how do we access it? It doesn't seem so natural anymore for
Yeah.
most of us.
Yeah.
And actually, the work that is waiting for us is the path to joy. The work of connection with our heart and with our child self, and the work of healing. Once you start down that path and you begin to have some healing, you start feeling this life force kind of starting to bubble up in a way.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh, that's been waiting for me all this time, but it's been sort of buried. It's been sort of kept down with pain and fear and habits of self-protection, defensiveness. And so then we feel this liberation of this life force, which energetic healers will tell you is very important for health and well-being to get to that.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, as you were saying that, it reminded me of a song I love called "Return to Innocence" by a group called Enigma, and the video of it kind of shows people. It shows people old and they're getting younger as they go through. And
Yeah.
I think we come into this world, as you talked about with children, that they're open. I mean, that's what I love about kids is they're so free. They live in the moment. They're truthful. My daughter was like, she was extremely truthful, but she never meant to hurt anybody, but
Right.
she would just tell you the way things are.
Uh-huh.
And I really wish as adults we could be more like that we could be more open and joyful. But we, as you said, we kind of put on these masks. We walk around and we pretend to be something that we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And the path seems to be finding our way back to what we were when we came in.
That's right. Was it Whitman who said the child is father of the man?
Oh, I didn't know. I
think it was Walt Whitman who said
that. Yeah. So hopefully, we can get to that. And as I said, it's just, it's so great to meet someone in the medical profession doing what you do that has the understanding of the medical side of it, as well as who we are as spirits and souls. And I mean, I think you'd be a great person to work with. It's really encouraging to see someone like you out there.
It's very rewarding for me. I can't tell you, and the other thing that I didn't get a chance to say is that I'm very willing to cry with my patients. I'm very willing to do that. For me, that means my heart is being involved.
Mm-hmm.
My heart has been touched. And I don't want to dampen that. So tears and the sharing of people's pain actually brings back to me a sense of great fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I'm the one who benefits, is what I tell them.
As when you said that, my daughter's in mental health counseling. She's in grad school right now, getting her master's degree, and so she's getting the training right now. Yeah. And one of the things I've told her is, stay detached and don't cry with your patients and stuff. And she works with children, and she loves children. And she's a very spiritual person. I mean, she's really open, intuitively and all that stuff. And I'm hoping she's going to listen to this podcast. She doesn't listen to my podcast, but I'll make her listen to this one. And give her permission to be open and to be fully human.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? Sometimes people just have to work for a while because training kind of puts these limits around you, and you feel like, oh my goodness, I don't have the freedom to be a real person in a professional role. And over time, especially, it depends on some of your mentors, you can put your whole heart into your work, and that's what makes it so rewarding, really.
Yeah, well, for me, that's what makes it effective, because I was led to the right person or whatever when I did go to therapy, and I met someone who was very genuine and real and able to cry with me and could understand, not just look at me as an analytical type of thing, but really, connect with me on an emotional level. Because I think that's what people need when they go to therapy. I think they need to connect emotionally. That's
right. And you need to feel like you're being seen for who you are in your uniqueness. Yeah. We're all unique,
Yeah, we are. And I think it's very important to understand who we are as spiritual beings.
That's right.
I think that's one of the biggest problems in our world today is people don't understand that we are spiritual beings, that we are here for a purpose. Our life has meaning, that our pain has meaning, and that death, which most of us don't even want to think about, is merely a transition into the next thing that we do.
Right. That's true. It's true.
So, Rebecca, anything else you want to say before we wrap up today?
And so those are the things that I would tell people in acute grief to look for, and to be, those are signs that this too shall be an important growth opportunity. It will not always feel so painful, but there's work to do. But at least you have evidence. You have evidence, and you're being shown. So pay attention.
Yeah. After you said that, it reminded me, I was talking with a parent the other day that as their child was passing, they said they felt this huge wave of peace. And they're like, I don't understand that. What was that about? Yeah. But as you said, look for those things, because those things are evidence that, there's a lot more to this than what we see.
Yes. And you're being watched over. I tell everyone, we're all watched over.
Yeah.
All.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I appreciate that. I want to let people know again where they can reach you, Rebecca. It's Rebecca S as in Sam, VallaMD.com. And I'll put that in the show notes for you. Also, go to ions.org. We referred to ions a few times here today. So go to ions.org for more information on near-death studies.
Great. Thank you so much.
Becca, thank you so much for doing this, and have a great weekend.
You too. It's my
Bye.
pleasure. Bye-bye.
231996. Since you're watching this on YouTube, please make sure you're subscribed. So hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell here, and it'll notify you when I have new content. Always, please share the information if you enjoy it. That helps me to get more views and to get the message out to more people. Thanks a lot and have a wonderful day.